When we talk about the top 30 skills that people need by 2030, knowledge of tech doesn't feature so highly at all. What comes are these fundamental human skills of empathy, of critical thinking, of problem solving, of reflection, of innovation. With this whole sensory overload of what AI can give us, what are we doing to help the human process differently or better?
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age, from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. My name is Simon Brown. I'm one of the co-authors of the book, The Curious Advantage, and today I'm here with my co-author, Paul Ashcroft.
Hi there.
And unfortunately, Garrett can't be with us today, but we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Serena Gonsalves-Fersch. Welcome, Serena.
Thank you for having me, Simon and Paul.
It's great to have you. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So a warm welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast. So, Serena, you're the global head of talent at SoftwareOne. You're also co-founder of Women in Learning Leadership, and your careers span talent, strategy, and learning. So maybe to get us started, can you give us a little bit about your journey and how curiosity has shaped you to getting where you are today?
Absolutely. So, yes, I had talent at SoftwareOne. So it covers L&D, our academy, DEI, performance, succession, and anything else I might have forgotten in the talent space. I've always been in HR and L&D. My master's was in HR, and then 20 years into it, my doctorate was in learning and development. I constantly tried to see where organizations are evolving and changing, and how learning, leadership, and talent have been evolving to meet those needs, sometimes successfully, sometimes less so.
Serena, you mentioned your doctorate there, and I know we've been talking for the past few years and really keen to hear more about that, because I know it was a labor of love, but also really, really fascinating work. Could you dive in a bit to your thesis and tell us what were some of the most exciting, surprising, or maybe provocative things that emerged from your research?
This sounds terrible to say, but in complete honesty, it started off as a midlife crisis. And I realized the next time I hit a round number, I'm probably going to buy a Maserati, because that would be a lot less of a crisis.
Be easier than a PhD, right?
It would be much easier. And I can't drive, so that's a real crisis. But it started off as a crisis, but it also started off as I would go to all the conferences, and I'd go to all these exhibitions, and I'd go to all these vendor events, and realize that nothing that was happening there was reflecting my life in the organization. Everything was being sold as the next magic bullet that would solve L&D's problems. We were talking about the same issues that we had been talking about for decades. There's all of this thought leadership, there's all of these methodologies, and then what I'm seeing in the marketplace doesn't reflect my life at all. So the original objective was to see organizations are changing, the workforce is changing. There is so much research in the future workforce and the future organizations. And what must L&D do to stay relevant? And actually, all bets were off. It started off with even the premise of, if you remove the learning function from an organization, would anybody notice?
Okay, so provocative then.
Well, in a lot of cases, it would be no. If you start keep on, we could do this back and forth. We go, okay, compliance has gone off to legal, and you take given functional learning back to the functions, and leadership training, that thing which nobody manages to measure for or bothers to measure for efficacy further enough. We just go, let people figure it out for themselves. What's left? What would be the role of L&D? And that was where I started out with the questions. I was supposed to do 23 interviews. I wound up doing 68. Simon was kindly one of them. I then reached data overload, and thankfully the pandemic happened, which meant I couldn't go anywhere besides analyze or do anything besides analyze my research. So there's some big elements that came out of it. I'm very lucky to have been with SoftwareOne for the last 5 years. They've allowed this mad scientist to try out her findings in various aspects of talent and learning. And here we are. So there isn't a black and white answer as to whether learning should exist anymore. There definitely is an answer which goes, L&D shouldn't exist in its current form or remit anymore. I sort of have this tagline saying, L&D is dead, long live learning.
So got to dive into that one then. So really keen. So it shouldn't exist in its current form. Is it dead in its current form? And what should it look like then?
We'll always need organizations at some point, at some scale, will always need a tick box which says, especially if you're listed publicly, to go, we do learning and development. We develop our people. We invest in our people's growth. We need that tick box somewhere. The question is, what do you want to be as a function? So if you want to own catalogs of courses and own the platform on which they sit and own the content libraries from where you acquire them, then great, that becomes you, and that becomes something that AI will probably kill off very quickly, because never before in history has knowledge been so freely accessible to anyone at any level. So there's that bit where you're a tick box. You might continue to exist because regulatory reasons or listed reasons. But to the overall success or failure of the company, there is no way to measure that. So how many of us would exist in that construct? I'm not entirely sure. Then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which goes moving into this more sort of systems thinking way. People are learning all the time. Humanity is learning all the time. Organizations are living, breathing, learning beings. So what should our role be? And I think our role becomes, one, providing the framework, those elements of psychological safety to go and try bits and break it and try again. The opportunities where people get to on the job and for experiential learning faster than dragging them onto a classroom and not calculating the opportunity cost of that. I think that we need to step back from the mentality of, if we can't measure it, then learning hasn't occurred. Because if I don't put you through happy sheets and count the butts on seats, then it does not, my existence hasn't been validated. And if I stop at providing and measuring the efficacy of learning in that point of time piece, like I don't tie it into performance, I don't tie it into the talent pipeline, I don't look at promotions, I don't look at where the business is investing in its strategy, either by location or by service, then what am I doing and why do I exist? So I think the old construct of us being this little pillar and the custodians of knowledge, that's going to go, or that really will go away. I'm already seeing it. We're an organization in hyper growth. We've got people, young people, and it's also from the research, people working in robotics and machine learning and AI, they're building things, they're breaking things, they're rebuilding them, they're trying things out at a faster pace that we can also ever imagine. And then you have somebody in L&D going, oh, no, that's not how you learn. Come and take my 8-hour course. When you'll be proficient at something. None of these conclusions are new. I'm not saying I've revolutionized everything, but I think it's a practitioner-led research. It's somebody who's had their nose to the grindstone for 25 years in L&D and is now getting to try it in an organization. So it's practical and real life, and I'm hoping that counts for something.
I really hear what you're saying. I want to click into, you just mentioned towards the end that even in SoftwareOne, but in lots of organizations, we're learning AI, we're learning robotics, we're learning how to use advanced algorithms in our work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And meanwhile, the L&D department is saying, oh yes, don't forget to make time to come on our course or to do our particular program. To what extent do you think that is going to, still happen? Is L&D going to still continue to push and need to put leaders and managers and people in organizations on these sort of mandatory programs because this is the way we lead or this is the way we manage? Or will it become more and more open and learner-centered and learner-led, do you think?
So the leadership bit is very, very interesting, Paul, because and we all know that the least amount of being able to prove efficacy is around leadership training. It's the highest amount of spent in learning functions around the world and least amount of effort put into measuring it. And I really think that there's two elements to this, and which is what I'm hoping to bring into our strategy as well. If you start teaching people leadership once they're already leaders, you've missed the boat. It's too late. Right from the start of a person's career, there should be leadership skills embedded into their ways of working. So how do I give feedback to a colleague? How can I be a buddy or a mentor? How do I react to a situation that's new or different to me? And I think there are leadership competencies that if you bring in from a really early age, when it's still possible to influence, I think you're already starting bringing in better leaders. I then think that when you get to a particular point, you have to have where people have a little bit of self-awareness on what it is they want to go and help themselves and create that safety net so somebody goes and accesses learning as and when they want. But I think we should completely acknowledge the bit of leadership training that makes you feel special, that makes you feel part of something, that makes you feel like you are contributing. And turn around and go, you know what? It's okay not to measure that. It's okay not to go on the traditional ROI way and go, I did this and therefore somebody did this. And I think that balance between I need to know what skill I should develop over time so I can develop vision and strategy and people leadership alongside what is it that makes me a leader in my firm and how do I feel part of this community. And I think they both go hand in hand and they don't start only when people become leaders.
Yeah, I think I would maybe put a build on there. I agree with you. The earlier that you start, the better in terms of building those leadership skills from an early age. I hope once people become leaders, however we define that there's still an opportunity to continuously develop, given that that's one of my tasks ahead of us at the moment, is how do we develop all of our leaders. I think that what's different is it becomes so much harder that I think then it's sending someone on a 2-day program is not going to fundamentally change my mindset and my beliefs and build the skills. I think it becomes a much more longer term piece and probably needs also tying to KPIs and incentives and communication and culture and all of those other pieces to really sort of significantly shift behavior, which then comes back to something you said earlier, I think, which is, learning can't just be in our little bubble. We have to, look across what does it mean in terms of succession? What does it mean in terms of business strategy? How do all of these things tie together, which is a different skill set to someone sort of just leading a training team, if you like.
And the pace, Simon, at which this is going. So I have to say my research was, startups, scale-ups, hyper-growth, technology accelerating firms that have had to fundamentally change their business models because of technology, like an oil company investing in renewables or a tobacco company now going tobacco-less or smokeless. And when even a traditional industry is changing at that pace, but then there are new industries evolving or new organizations evolving, the pace at which they're moving, the pace at which they're merging, acquisitions are happening, roles of people are expanding and contracting. You cannot have a static leadership offering. You can't have a static learning offering because the organization's not waiting for you to come up with a solution. So how do you make sure that your offering or your catalog or your direction and your framework is agile enough that it works for all sorts of the reasons I mentioned below? You also have in a lot of the organizations I looked at, founder-led or founder CEOs who had a brilliant idea and they're visionaries for their product and their service, sort of wound up with 500 people under them, not exactly knowing, quite chuffed that they got there, but not exactly, that wasn't the goal. The goal was to make good stuff and sell good stuff and continue creating good stuff. And now I have 500 people under me and I've got to figure out this is now an organization. So I've gone from the startup bit of, letting my mates know, talking about it on social media, selling it to my wider network, to now having to think about my funding, about my organization structure, about my regulatory needs, about how you keep people in, how you keep the brain within the organization and still motivate them. So all of those things you put together, you can't have the old static learning function. Something's got to change and we've got to be more agile as the organizations we are going to be serving are.
You mentioned there just earlier about a framework. And I know a lot of companies at the moment are thinking, particularly in the sort of context of AI and digital and how our world is changing, we need to refresh or update our framework of how we're developing our leaders and our people. But then at the same time, Serena, you're advocating for a much more flexible, open model. So what's your advice there, or what have you tried or you seen works in terms of that balance between, what's actually driving what we want and to what extent do we allow what needs to happen?
So I use framework in the very broad, the very systems thinking sort of sense. So let me give you an analogy. We used to be, if you think about how learning started, the old, Henry Ford model, I teach you how to do your job, you do your job. There's a whole assembly line, you're taught how to use the machine, you use the machine. We sort of then involved using the analogy, sort of like a coach from the sidelines, right? The play is happening and people are doing their things and we keep shouting and pulling people in and out as and when we need to talk to them or give them stuff. And so we're very much not directing the play, but being in control of the knowledge that people then need to execute on. And then the last bit, what I call framework, is sort of like the scaffolding within which somebody is free to experiment. I have a diagram which I finally arrived with. I'm very, very happy to share it. It's public and on the doctorate, which goes, what are the elements that underpin your learning function? And the first thing I probably want to start with is, what is your skill as a learning leader? And the first thing you should probably have is understanding how adults learn in a corporate context. Ask 50 L&D people how adults learn. You'll probably get 57 different answers, and 40 of those will be what a vendor told you. So going back to the basics to understand how is it that people learn and why they are learning. They are learning to do better in their jobs. They are learning to contribute to business value, and they are learning to contribute to their success and business success, because the two are intrinsically linked in a corporate context. So yes, we want the happy employees who feel that they are growing and they are developing, but let's not forget that scaffolding. The scaffolding is the corporate context, the business value, what are you bringing to your career and your organization, what the organization is giving back to you in return. And that's sort of what I mean by the framework, the safety, to go and try new things, the ability to go and pull out data for yourself, the ones where you have to share. Because if you ask anybody in a company, when you don't know something, what do you do? They'll first say, ask Google. They'll then say, ask ChatGPT. And then they'll say, they ask the guy next to them. Your LMS doesn't crack the top 5, maybe not even the top 10, if you're being fair. And so I think that's the bit which has to change, the need for us to control or define everything. And that's what I mean by framework. So you're sitting sort of as the architect of how learning works within the organization. You're providing that scaffolding. You're making the links to performance. You're making the links to promotion. You're making the links, as Simon said, to succession. And then people see the value of what they're doing for themselves, as opposed to you dragging them into your course or trying to force them onto a system.
And how are you managing that agility? Because I agree with everything you're saying in terms of, I think things are speeding up from a learning function. Or the learning industry, we need to make sure that we are keeping up with the pace of new developments. And if we look at AI, that's almost on a sort of weekly basis that there's new developments. So, the days of being able to take 6 months to produce a program and 6 months to roll it out and have everyone take it, in 6 weeks, things may be very different, let alone 6 months. So how are you creating that agility within your teams to be able to respond to those changing needs?
It's a very good question. So there's 3 separate elements that I can think of. So in some ways, we're starting from scratch. So the wonderful thing about technology now is we can think in terms of skills. So we can look at everybody's roles in the organization, the skills they need to perform their job functionally, leadership and core. And we can start to map that to whether it's a learning intervention or it's an experience, and sometimes bring those two together. We're still in the very early stages, and I know that a lot of organizations are far further along in their skills journey than we are. But the ability for us to do this for an organization that is so tech forward, that it's constantly changing every day. SoftwareOne did 21 acquisitions in 3 years, right? It grew its tech stack and its client base and its market just at a rapid pace. And so we had to go dial back in learning and in talent and go, okay, what is it that people need from us? They're coming with X. What is the delta that we're going to give? everybody is talking about skills organizations now. I'm not talking about it in the purest definition where you remove jobs and hierarchies and functions and organization structures. I think that's a bit too fantastical for us. I don't know whether it's actually practical for anybody, but I'm sure some of the organizations listening in might have tried it. But for us, it makes sense to give people the pathway. And skills is a brilliant way to do that. Defining that at each level, associating it to the client need and the business need, and then associating learning interventions. And when I say learning interventions, I don't only mean courses. We've got our experiential learning. We've got on-the-job, hands-on and case studies and, GitHub and Code Academy and make and break things, and associating all of that to skills development. And now the other element which I wanted to mention was around the SoftwareOne Academy, because that was where we genuinely stepped back and went, okay, what are our problems? Our problems are time to competency. Our problems are fighting for tech talent in an already saturated market. Our problems are the cost of this tech talent and the talent pipeline. And our problems are then getting them to stay, because attrition rates are so high and you don't have the name that you would have with, a Meta or an Apple or a Google in order to retain the best. So what the Academy did is take ownership of the whole talent pipeline. So from sourcing to recruitment to onboarding to training to on-the-job experiential learning to deployment on client side, following young talent, career-changing talent, and people returning to work after long career breaks, looking at all the talent in the market that wouldn't necessarily have a chance at a career in technology, and starting from their grassroots communities, going into regions where we didn't have offices where people could work remotely, and then building these fluid learning journeys. It was a really, really good place for us to start because we could actually calculate it in business terms. So I know that in India and Brazil, I knocked off attrition from 38% to near zero. I know that in managed services, we managed to increase the efficiency of people handling calls by 7,000 calls a day, just by bringing in a different skill set and people who are enthusiastic, who want to learn and then who want to try. I have metrics from the business that I could use, and then I could take those metrics now into the learning function and go, this works. If we do this in a concerted way, if we sit at the table and look at what your business priorities are for next year, what are the type of projects, what are the type of customers, then what we can come back to you with is both skills and behaviors that work for you for the next year. And if that changes during the year, you bring in clients and you bring in technologies that we never have, we've now created this framework that's agile enough to pivot to your needs. So that's where we're at. And I'm not saying it's perfect. The Academy has been going on for 4 years now. This week's its 4th anniversary. And it's managed about 30 odd countries and over 50 different work streams and curricula. So taking that then to the 1,000 odd people and multiplying that by the 9,500 people and going all the way up their journey to when they're leaders, that's the sort of way we are thinking at the moment.
It's a really interesting model, Serena, because and is this what you mean by sort of shifting L&D to sort of sitting under a broader talent umbrella? Because what I like very much about what you said there, you're starting with the problems the organization is trying to solve. You're then looking for the specific and tangible ways you can go and solve them. And it seems like you're bubbling this up from specific talent pools or areas where you can actually apply, focus, make a difference, and then amplify that in the organization. Is that then a model that then expands? How does that work in practice?
So I'm quite fortunate because I started off owning the SoftwareOne Academy, our corporate university, education, philanthropy. I moved on to owning broader talent management and then finally having all of L&D under me. Every single person who enters our profession has a different trajectory. And so it differs, the answer differs. But what I'm encouraging L&D to do is rather than see themselves as the knowledge custodians or the knowledge providers or the platform, the technology, the design guardians of content and knowledge, to start with a different starting point want of a better word. To your question, Paul, what is the business's raison d'etre? Why does the business have this population? Why are we here? And then go, what are the other elements contributing towards that organization's success? So I always find it very odd when L&D has no contact with talent acquisition. That's bizarre. They're the ones who are getting people into the business. They're the ones who know what skills they're hiring. People come in, they're thrust upon learning along with their onboarding. And then 3 or 6 months later, when they fail their probation, the number of people who write, I wasn't trained enough, goes through the roof. And then it's my fault. I didn't even know the dude was coming in. The de-linking between learning and talent acquisition, for me, is really bizarre. The same thing, workforce planning, understanding what your organization benches. How are we resourcing? Do we bring in contractors for a short-term basis for skills on a particular project and then have them go away? Or can we be building in-house? This build versus buy conversation, we never are part of it, which is so bizarre considering we're supposed to be that build element. Everybody, take another element, performance management, right? Every single person in every organization has some form of performance management or the other. Most organizations have something called development goals. I often stand in front of rooms and go, as L&D people, how many of you go and have access to those development goals or even think to ask for it? Knowing that would literally be the training needs analysis of your entire organization in one file. I'm always amazed by how few people have that. And you can keep going on every single, succession. Succession, we don't talk about how much of a learner was this person? How much of a leader was this person? Did this person have a coach? We're not even brought in half the time onto why somebody's promoted to leadership because we haven't set ourselves up to connect to those elements. So I'm in a fortunate position being able to see all the various aspects and have L&D draw from that. Coaching is a really, really good example because I brought it up. There are organizations just go off in various directions and every leader finds their own coach and then assume that there is some sort of anonymity associated with it. And I'm going, no, coaching is a learning intervention. It is one way to address an issue or address a development need. If you want it to be a great secret, go get a therapist. This is your organizational to make you a better executive and a leader. And we have no insight into that because, again, it sits somewhere else in the ether. So I really, really believe that this isolation that we've sort of brought on ourselves over the years by confining ourselves to the analyze, design, develop, deliver, implement, manage the catalog, platform, and content libraries, that's just not a sustainable or a strategically relevant way for us to exist.
We're talking with Dr. Serena Gonsalves-Fersch. She's the Global Head of Talent at SoftwareOne and also co-founder of Women in Learning Leadership. She's also winner of the 2024 Collins Deed Award. She holds a doctorate from Middlesex University, focused on the future of learning in tech-driven organizations. At SoftwareOne, she leads performance management, succession, talent strategy, workforce planning, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the SoftwareOne Academy that we've just been hearing about. And her work bridges the critical talent practices with impactful learning solutions. And she's got background in consulting, internal leadership, and brings expertise in learning strategy, skills frameworks, career development, and predictive learning. She also champions a modern integrated approach that prepares organizations and individuals for the future of work. Let's dive into this co-founder role that you had for the Women in Learning Leadership. So tell us more on the important work that you do there.
Happily, it's still in its infancy. We just had our first anniversary last month. We started this with the LPI, the CLO of the Learning and Performance Institute, and a group of women learning leaders. It was triggered a few years ago by this research that Don Taylor did, which said that 70% of people who enter the learning profession are women. But when you start looking at CLO level, 70% are men. So it sort of flips around, and we couldn't understand why. I also believe that the concept of women in leadership transcends learning. I don't believe we have a problem with women in HR or women in learning and all those hashtags that we put around it. We're doing just fine. Where we have a problem, and that transcends not just our profession, but every other, is women in leadership. And I don't have an answer, but I definitely want to explore the question. So what we do is we run webinars into topics which really we talk about the NDAs, we talk about your rights in employment, we talk about how you could be mentored into taking on or putting yourself forward. We actually offer the mentorship programs. It's meant to be on a very, let's bring to the table things that people don't want to talk about. And I'm not interested in the platitudes. I head DEI. I've never been one of those that. So there's a Monty Python sketch from Life of Brian, when he comes out ringing the bell saying, "Bring out your dead." I feel like every March we ring that bell going, "Bring out your women." And then in June, we ring the bell going, "Bring out your LGBTQ people." And, and then a few months later, we'll do, we'll bring out your green. We're on Earth Day. I have never been one of those people who go, let's talk without action. So the webinars, the mentoring, we also support a charity. So we encourage everybody who attends our sessions to contribute to the United Nations Women's Refugee Foundation, because we really believe that women and girls suffer disproportionately in war and in crisis. So bringing in that element of girls' education as well. So it's very, very early days. I would love to see where it goes. But right now, the focus is on a safe space to find out what it is that we can do to support anybody who wants to be leaders, but especially women. The DI has become a huge bit of conversation. So our next seminar is on the evolving corporate world and what's happening the other side of the pond, and especially with DI, and what is the role of us as corporates in order to fulfill that. And that transcends women, right? That's everybody.
So for anyone listening that is keen to get involved or learn more on that, how can people find out about it?
So the Learning and Performance Institute have a page dedicated to women in learning leadership. Fill out a form, drop us a line. Follow us on LinkedIn. There's Sarah Hatton. Follow me on LinkedIn. We're constantly posting when the next webinars and when the next meetups are coming about.
Serena, in the first part of our conversation, you made a really compelling case for how L&D should be more systemically connected into the organization. And we're not going to be able to let you go without talking about one of the biggest drivers of change for L&D, around AI, and also what that means for learning and predictive learning. I'm really interested to hear what you think are some of the big things that are going to change, and what does that mean for the role of L&D professionals at the moment?
I'll talk about it from my context. So the first thing is, when you open any sort of pitch, everybody talks about using AI for more content creation, faster, better, ChatGPT, or talk about your LLMs and all of that. And everything is about, it can build faster. And I turn around, roll my eyes and go, because that's what the world needs, more content. So that's the bit of AI in learning that I'm not interested in. And I willfully choose to ignore it. My instructional designers, within the parameters of our organization, we're a co-pilot organization, we all have access to it. If my I don't call them instructional designers, I call them learning design leads. If they choose to use AI to accelerate the journeys that they are building, then that's absolutely fine within the ethical and legal parameters of our organization. But that's not what keeps me awake at night, or what, as a learning senior leader, I care about. I care about what, to your point, Paul, the predictive ability of it, the ability to bring about information from various different systems to work like BI on steroids and give you information that informs how your people develop, to give you information on how people are choosing to develop outside the learning function, so that you know how you can pivot, and to then go and look at the skills coming into the organization that link to talent acquisition, that link to performance, that link to forward-looking business strategy, and be able to say, this is what is coming. How do you prepare for it? So I know that sounds very idealistic. You may say I'm a dreamer. Sure, I'm not the only one. But I do really, really believe that that's the area that we should be focusing on.
And are you starting to see, have you started to see some examples of this? Like, have you started to see some of this predictive analytics either in succession planning or in learning design, or what you can provide for people? What have you seen that's working?
not fully incorporated into organizations as yet. I'm seeing it in small jumps. So we're starting with obviously taxonomies, skills taxonomies and associated learning with that. And then our job frameworks and architectures getting it a bit more easy to update on the skills bit with the AI support. So it's in tiny steps at the moment, or at least it's a tiny steps for me. But I see where it will be reflected more is in this bringing together of the big talent platforms and talent management platforms, talent acquisition platforms, and the learning platforms. And that's how I think it will be reflected technology-wise. I think in every organization, as usual, it's garbage in, garbage out. You ask the wrong questions, you're going to get weird answers. So I think that as learning people, we need to get savvier in knowing what to ask of AI. And it would be very disappointing if the only thing we're asking of it is to continue to build more content.
Fully agree. I've been trying to give lots of thought on where's it going and try and read the sort of weak signals on what's going to be the impact of AI on learning. And what do you see as the biggest disruption that's likely to come to corporate learning in the next few years as a result of AI?
So this might sound really weird, but it was actually brought to my attention by Laurie Niles Hoffman, who I think the world of, and it's nobody's actually considering the absolute sensory overload that AI is going to give us. We're already talking about social media and the impact it's having on the next generation, and the impact it's having even on learning and absorption and being able to and changing behaviors. If AI is creating knowledge at a pace that we have never seen before, I don't know how we as humans should be supporting people to cope with it. When we talk about the top 30 skills, the World Economic Forum says that people need in organizations of the future by 2030, knowledge of tech doesn't feature so highly at all. What comes are these fundamental human skills of empathy, of critical thinking, of problem solving, of reflection, of innovation. It's something to think about with this whole sensory overload of what AI can give us. What is the role of the human, or what are we doing to help the human process differently or better? So I think that's definitely an element I wanted to highlight when we were talking about AI. The other bit is, and it's also because I look after DIB and therefore which has touch points into ESG, is we've not actually sat to think about the environmental implications of this, right? So the massive trend now to make your little toy, you've probably seen that on ChatGPT. You can make a little action figure of yourself. It saw spikes in the grid and the usage of power to create that, because AI uses a lot of resources. So that's another element which I think that now we're just all excited about it, but as it starts getting more intelligent and its use becomes more vast, something to consider will be the environmental factors as well. So I think those are the two elements. Everything I've said before, everything we talk about before are all about the positive aspects. And yes, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of positive disruption. But I wanted to bring out these two elements because they're not often talked about, and I do wonder what it will be like. I wonder, the 7 years it took me to write the doctorate, what that's going to look like in 10 years' time with AI next to you.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And to connect those two thoughts, in the first one you talked about, the L&D part of the organization needs to be much more systemically connected. When you mentioned that, okay, in the past you say, well, you can go and Google that, or you could go and ask ChatGPT. To some extent, is the learning department even bothering to provide content? Yes, you said it earlier, maybe there is some, but actually you can make the assumption that it's not necessary. The assumption is to enable people to find the right things to learn, and how, more importantly, they're going to actually apply that to problem solve in their organization and grow their career. It sounds easy to say, but that sounds like a pretty fundamental shift in how people are seeing and interacting with their L&D teams in their company, right?
Yep. So your pathways are skills to be successful, and your learning journeys are suggestions on how you can acquire and hone in and develop these skills. There isn't actually which says, if you do this. I don't ever believe that there has been a straight out, besides maybe in how to use machines, so more functional learning. I was taught this, so I can do this. And then I can do this, therefore organizational performance has improved. How do we make that leap there? We never have fully managed to suss out how we move from business problem, learning solution, individual performance, team performance, organizational performance. We have never managed to do that. I therefore think that instead of trying to force ourselves down that hole of now trying to do exactly that by defining interventions that pull you away and result as a sort of a cost to the business and taking somebody out of their context, we loop back and go, what do journeys mean in the new world? What does an acquisition of skills mean in the new world? What are options that I can give you in order to do that? What are experiences I can give you in order to do that? Or what are experiences that you've gone out and get and you can come and tell it back to the organization. So we have another way of filtering it down to one of the other 59 countries. So I think that's the element. And then content probably will exist, but it's secondary. It's not your starting point for your solution.
So we're coming up to time. We've covered a lot. So we've gone through some of your career, your masteраtes, the 7 or 8 years you spent on your doctorate in learning and development. What triggered that around how nothing had really reflected the life you were seeing inside your organization, and the question of what must learning and development actually do to stay relevant, and if we remove the learning and development function, actually would anyone notice, and what that would mean. So talk about some of your thoughts on system thinking, learning all the time, what should the role of a learning leader be, difference of sort of on the job and experiential learning, and some of the discussion around measurements and should we or shouldn't we prove the efficacy, particularly when we're talking about leadership development, some of your experiences from working in a hypergrowth organization and looking at skills around AI, ML, robotics, etc. Talked about pace and the increasing pace, and particularly what you've seen from a startup perspective. We can't have a static offering. We need to help people change. We had the discussion around agility and the need for us as learning organizations to make sure we're creating that agility, which means we can't control everything. Then went into some of the discussion around skills organizations and the role of skills, maybe not in a totally pure way, but our skills creates the transparency around where to focus. Importance on focusing on things like time to competency, retention, and tying into some of the wider talent processes. You shared some great data around some of the metrics that you've done, 38% to zero attrition for India and Brazil, 7,000 cool efficiency improvements in some of the other areas. So great to have those metrics. And that there's no way that a learning and development function can operate without being tied into talent in the future, and the importance of those links to workforce planning, to succession, to coaching, to development goals, to talent acquisition, etc. We heard about the great work you're doing for women in learning leaders, and if people are interested, check out the LPI website for more details on that. And then we dive into the world of AI and content development, how instructional designers may be using it, that we don't need the content tsunami of just more and more content, and then some of the things we need to consider around sort of sensory overload, and also the environmental impact. So a lot we covered. If there's one takeaway for our listeners from all of that, Serena?
I really think that it's a time for you listeners, and this is where, to harken back to your curiosity element, it's that step back to go and understand. I need to understand how fundamentally organizations learn. And I think we stopped doing that in the whole mire of the day-to-day job and what we're producing and delivering. I think it's to go back to the thought leadership that's coming out from the industry, which never has changed. Think about how the elements of the future skills, which curiosity is one of, and how do people want to find out more? Think about the reset of the organization and how people learn. Nigel Payne's got a book on that. Go back to the Clark Quinns when he was talking about revolutionizing L&D. All of this, we've been performance consulting in organizations and learning was written in the 90s. There's so much that we can take a step back and go back to our roots and go, how do people learn? To what end are they learning? And how does this contribute to business success? And therefore, what's my role in that journey? And I think if we did that, we'd come up with a very, very different answer than catalogs, courses, and content.
You've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. We're always curious to hear from you. So if you think there was something useful or valuable from this conversation, please do write a review for the podcast on your preferred channel, saying why this was so and what you've learned from it. Always appreciate hearing our listeners' thoughts and having a curious conversation. So join today using hashtag Curious Advantage. Curious Advantage book is available on Amazon worldwide, audio, physical, digital, or audiobook copy now, and further explore our 7 C's model for being more curious. And subscribe to the podcast today. Follow the Curious Advantage on LinkedIn and Instagram, and keep exploring curiously. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast. The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon. Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Jessica Wickham.